Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. And I'd like to thank very much Equinix for hosting this Reach for Cloud 9 webinar. Clearly a very pertinent subject. There's over 300 registrations and already lots and lots of people on board. So very nice to see that this is a topic that people are really interested in. I would like to take a moment to just welcome our panelists, and if I could just go around the table, starting with James. I wonder if you could just introduce yourself for the benefit of our participants.
Very appreciative. Thank you very much. Yes, hello. My name is James Maudsley. I work in Equinix segment marketing division and fulfill the role of being the company's subject matter expert for financial services and for insurance within EMEA. And in that role, I advise our salespeople and also customers and prospects about the whole digitization road as far as it relates to financial services.
Fantastic, thank you. Gordon.
Hi folks, Gordon MacArthur, CEO and founder of Beeks Financial Cloud. Those of us that haven't heard of us or don't know of us, we are one of the larger capital market specialists in the public and private cloud arena. So we've been building out cloud infrastructure in Equinix data centers, exchange-facing data centers for 11 years now. And we do this solely for capital markets. So hopefully I've got a bit of experience to talk about.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gordon. Amit, I wonder if I could ask you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Toby, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Amit Bothra. I'm a senior manager with PwC. I work within their technology risk, data and analytics team, and I've been working on cloud programs for the past decade, helping some of our big clients on their transformation journey.
Fabulous. Judith.
Hi, I'm Judith Swan. I lead our capital markets team for Microsoft UK, supporting, as you can imagine, a wealth of customers across asset management and investment management, exchanges, the market infrastructure customers, and also wealth customers as well.
Big remit, thank you. Catalina, I wonder if I could turn to you.
Thanks, Toby. Hi, everyone. Thanks as well to James and the Equinix team for having us today. I'm Catalina Vasquez. I head the historical data business at Refinitiv. At Refinitiv being one of the largest providers in financial markets, data and infrastructure. We've been working very closely with different cloud providers, and specifically over the last year or two, I've been working on solving one of the largest problems that some of our customers face when dealing with historical data, and addressing this with them. So happy to share the experience today.
That's really good. And last but not least, Sitharam. Oh, Sitharam, you're on mute. I wonder if we can unmute you. There we go.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Sitharam Gore. I'm the Chief Information Officer for Pico. Pico is a leader in fintech services. We primarily operate in hosting, connectivity, data, analytics, and cloud. I think that's the relevant topic here. We have been operating in this space for over 10 years. We primarily service all the financial clients. But before joining Pico, I come from a trading background. I was at a buy side and sell side, building most of their trading platforms, starting from front to back. I think this is a topic that's close to my heart. So let's go through and then have fun.
Thank you, Sitharam, and thank you to all the panelists. A really strong mix of people from across the industry. I think we're going to have a really great discussion today. I think it's just to set the scene, you know, cloud has become a sort of more viable in capital markets in recent years. Many banks are now openly trumpeting their prowess in the market. Goldman Sachs comes to mind, JP Morgan, Citi, and lots of hedge funds and so on using the cloud as well, which is great. And cloud, you know, gives access to analytics, insights, data, all sorts of use cases that traditionally maybe didn't make their way to the cloud. And of course, recently we've had Equus and SGX moving entire matching engines into the cloud. So really, it seems like it's moving apace, really, moving ahead of pace, both in the front and the back office, and of course in the middle office as well. And I wonder, I think for me, there's a sort of question here: what is driving these workloads to the cloud, and sort of what sort of applications are we starting to see people deliver into the cloud as we move into this now? And I wonder, actually, I might turn to you, Gordon, as a provider of private cloud services.
Sure. So, I mean, cloud's not new in capital markets, right? It's over the last few years, it's become a very trendy catch-all term, but there has been, we've been doing this stuff for 10 years now, probably using different marketing terminology, but I think what we've seen over the last few years is the bigger institutions now embracing it, right? 3 or 4 years ago, there was, the mid-market, the smaller guys, prop shops, trading firms, smaller exchanges were, utilizing cloud capability, but there was still a healthy skepticism or a reluctance in the absolute biggest banks and investment managers out there. But I think what we see now is, as you're right, Toby, is a wholesale escalation to the cloud, right? And it's simple. It's not capital markets is no different to any other industry out there. The enablers are still the same. It's about flexibility. It's about agility. It's about ease of deployment. I mean, one of our older banking customers tells stories of trying to procure, just standard servers that take 6, 7, 8 months to get through procurement, get on site, and get delivering value to the business. Right? When you are utilizing cloud compute, even basic infrastructure, you can reduce that to minutes and hours of spinning up infrastructure within whatever cloud paradigm you like. So it allows them to be much more flexible, much more agile. Test and dev environments, you can spin them up, you can spin them down. So I think that's the main driver. It's flexibility and agility. People will quite often quote cost, but I think you need to be careful here. If you've got your own data center, right, that is costing you tens of millions a year, collapsing that into the cloud absolutely is a big cost saving, right? But I don't think looking at it as the main driver to try and take wholesale cost out of IT, I'm not sure that's always accurate when you look at some long-term TCO for some cloud deployments. So cost can be a factor to play, but not the main driver. And I think we're seeing it everywhere, right? I think in market data, particularly, a lot of the bigger exchanges themselves have put market data up in the hyperscaler cloud providers, and people can draw that down and access as they see fit. I'm still skeptical about whether you're going to see trade execution in the cloud. I think we're a long way away from it. I know SGX and Aquis made some announcements about proving it in the cloud. I think they proved it some multicast worked. I don't think there was any matching going on at all. So I think we're a long way away from that. I think from a regulatory point of view, I don't see how you can show the equal access. Data centers need to have cable equalization. They need to be able to support FPGAs and all sorts of weird and wonderful bespoke hardware. I don't think the generic cloud or hyperscaler cloud has an answer to that. So we see more and more hybrid cloud footprints being delivered and more connectivity to the hyperscalers. If I look 3 years ago, if we had a mid-size institution deploy with us, they deployed with us. And there was not really a huge amount of connectivity and hybrid connectivity to the other cloud providers, hyperscalers, whatever you want to call them. I think every single deployment we put in place now has hybrid connectivity attached, whether that's to AWS, Azure, GCP, another provider in the capital market space. So that in itself tells you that the move to cloud is becoming more and more pervasive across every market segment, every size of institution. Some are embracing it quicker than others, but you know, it's not for everyone. It's not for every workload. As I say, I think execution will still remain in colo and remain in exchange data centers for a long time to come. But you know, there's certainly there's a lot of use cases in moving that market data and the peripheral applications that surround capital markets into hyperscalers or generic cloud, if you want to call it that.
There's some really interesting points in there, particularly around execution. I think, and I definitely want to come back to that at some point. I wonder actually if I could move on just now to Catalina. And Catalina, you're with Refinitiv. There's you do an awful lot of data in the cloud and so on. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I think so. Refinitiv has been on a journey together with clients when it comes to cloud, right? And we are looking at which data sets make sense for us to place in different cloud instances, and where the communities are gravitating towards. I think generally when our clients look at the question of where these workloads will be going, which workloads to shift to the cloud and which ones not to, there's a series of considerations. I think you can split it into two. On the one hand, you're looking at what value will this bring above the line? So echoing some of the comments that Gordon was making earlier around being able to drive innovation, to move faster, to remain agile. The use of AI and machine learning, for example, that has never been more attainable than ever before with the capabilities that cloud providers now have. And in a recent survey that Refinitiv conducted, actually, we have seen a shift in the way in which financial services are embracing AI and machine learning, for example. It's now considered to be a clear focus area to drive competitive advantage, to manage the risk of the ongoing operation of the business, rather than more of an afterthought that the technology teams would be looking to implement to drive efficiency later on down the line. So it's really moved the conversation and shifted the conversation to a business priority. And then in terms of below the line, I think it depends on what area and what workflows you're looking at. Very much talking from a historical data standpoint, we're talking about petabytes worth of data that every single client would be storing and managing on site themselves, to really shifting to a new model, shifting to a model where we're looking at a utility model where everyone connects to that same data set, accesses the data set when they need it and as they need it, without having to worry about the management of that data set. So I think that's what's shifting, and we are seeing a real change in the conversation, and that's probably been accelerated as well over the last year with the break of the pandemic.
I think that you made a really good point there about how it's becoming a business decision now, right? Rather than just a technical need or decision or desire. Judith, I wonder if I can maybe ask you, and related to that, if you are a company, let's say, I mean, like Microsoft, one of the bigger of the cloud providers, right? And so I'm sure you guys have a lot of experience with a lot of different firms who maybe are setting out on their journey. And I just wondered, should we, if very often when you make a business decision, it's kind of all in, and I wonder if is that the right approach, or should firms really be like putting a toe in the water to begin with, or starting small and then building out, or should they go big bang and get the whole lot in? Be interesting.
It's a good question, and actually, I think there's a couple of things to take into consideration, regardless of how much you go all in, whether it's small or large, that need to be there as building blocks before an organisation should start using cloud. And that's really to start thinking about that governance model, the operating model that you're going to be using. Quite often we see where people have kind of dipped their toe into using cloud and maybe haven't given it the same kind of consideration that you would do to how you are running your on-premises environment. So you start to see a lot of kind of shadow IT built up, where people have created POCs to the side or pilots, and then actually trying to retrospectively fit that into a kind of proper structured governance model. We talk about landing zones quite a lot, but how do you make sure that you have all your operating considerations set up? So actually, regardless of whether you do all in big bang or if you're just starting out the initial pilots, we absolutely believe that having those kind of building blocks, the foundations and the platforms to put it on as a first step for anything. The next thing that we also kind of look at is to say, what are the applications doing? Is this really what you want to have in the future? What is your end state goal and vision in terms of capability? Because actually the most important thing about using cloud is the applications. It's not necessarily the physical infrastructure itself. It's around what do you want to do from a business capability standpoint, and then determining what are the capabilities that you want to keep with you in the future, and therefore what do you want to take across, and actually do you have to refactor that as you do it? Which ones do you want to demise, and actually which ones could you get capability from elsewhere because your own in-house capability has got so much legacy attached to it that actually you could get best of breed from a SaaS provider rather than using your own in-house capability in the future. And some of the things that we see really, just to echo Gordon's comments around cost, using cloud as a cost driver probably has quite a finite benefit case to it. You might get a great kind of initial sharp benefit from a cost perspective, but ultimately it's your application and your business capabilities that you want to think about. So that kind of application estate approach, I think we would always countenance. And if you don't have cloud capability already, I know we've talked about, what are the other things that you should think about? That cultural piece and the skills piece is absolutely paramount to using cloud effectively in your organization. There's a real mind shift change that I think has to happen in order for people to think differently about how they're doing application development, such as moving into much more of a DevOps mode of operation in your own business. And the skills piece, I think, is a great opportunity for people to actually start small and build up that skills and experience within their own organizations, because we really love to see each customer having their own internal muscle, as we call it, to actually manage and operate and build their cloud capability, and then bring in experts to help them kind of layer over and build on it where they need it in addition to that.
So there's a lot in what you said there, I think, in the sense that it's not just, a couple of technicians going off and doing something. There's an awful lot of cultural and governance and other aspects to it that really people have to consider. And maybe if you just try to jump all in tomorrow, that's not actually going to be that successful, because you've got to get the mindset together and get people's mind around it. And I think part of that, from what I understand, is, of course, cloud has a different financial model, right? And a lot of traditional technology is on a CapEx model. As we move into cloud, it becomes much more of an OpEx play. And I wondered, Amit, if you had any sort of advice on, or could shed any light on how that is affecting firms and what they can do to make that shift?
Sure, Toby, sure. But before I answer that question, I have to say, just a quick observation. I'm fascinated by the way you have put your microphone. I often do that, with the cable coming in the front, and my 8 years old is like, Daddy, you've got it wrong. You got to put it behind you. But anyways, to kind of answer your question, sorry, go on. Toby.
I was just going to say, I do it this way as a rebellion against my children.
And at least give them a chance to kind of speak about it, isn't it?
Exactly.
Great. All right. Okay, so before I answer your question, kind of let me start by making it a bit simpler for some of our audience in terms of, comprehending these terms OpEx and CapEx. Now, put simply, any acquisition of IT capability for a long-term usage would be classified as a capital expenditure or CapEx. And any kind of IT spend on product services consumed within the 1 year itself would be termed as an operating expense, in short form OpEx. Now, this, of course, is a very generalistic, I would say, explanation, and there are certainly many nuances to it. In terms of specifically answering your question, you're right. Traditionally, software firm, software financing has operated on a CapEx basis, as there have been several advantages in doing so. Be it, kind of depreciation claims, tax advantages, long-term funding options, so on and so forth. Whereas on the other side, OpEx has been around for similar timescales, but in general, kind of mostly used for smaller IT spends, consumables, maintenance, short-term contracts, and so on. And certainly there are kind of benefits with this model also in terms of having a greater control and command over your IT spend. Flexibility and agility is something which Gordon already referred to when he was answering his question. Now, with cloud coming on the forefront and kind of being adopted in a major way in the recent times, it certainly has been more lucrative due to this very OpEx model. And firms have leveraged this model to reduce the overall risk of not being stuck or tied up to one technology. And likewise, the investments needed to maintain different aspects of IT, different services is no longer the same, and nothing as compared to what it used to be, thus giving organizations that option to kind of use their workforce and kind of deploy them in improving their own products and services. So once again, I would say the OpEx model is providing the much needed flexibility, agility, which is most needed during these times when technology is changing at a much faster pace than ever before.
Thank you, and well done for pulling me up on the CapEx, OpEx thing. It's very easy to drift into terminology that I'm familiar with, but maybe other people aren't. And so I think that's really good. Thank you. And a great explanation. I think I'd be really interested also, and Sitharam with the Pico, what do you think? I mean, do you see the demand, a change in the demand, say, for custom software, trading, risk management apps, how does it affect all of those sorts of things? Because, cloud is great, isn't it? If you've got huge amounts of data and huge compute power requirements, say in risk management, do you see a lot of impacts there? Keen to get your view.
No, thanks, Toby, for the question. It's actually very fascinating to see the different, people having different perspectives or covering different perspectives of cloud. Let me see if I can put summarize it and put it in a capital markets technology fashion. Gordon brought up a good point about trade execution. I agree. I don't see trade execution moving into the cloud as soon as people expect it to be. But let's take a look at it, right? If you go back in time, I mean, if you look at the trade execution, most of the execution was happening within a client's data centers or within their own data centers, whether it is their own built data centers or whether they co-located with Equinix and other providers. And that has changed over time with the likes of Pico, where we offer those hosting services and we try to convert some of the CapEx spend into OpEx spend in the form of private cloud or private hosting. And with the cloud, it's actually taking it to the next level, right? Where it's not only the CapEx, OpEx, which you will get because you are paying as you go, but also it is ease of use or agility, or how can you really provide compute or any infrastructure resources on demand. I mean, yeah, it does take time if you own a physical device on procuring a device, racking, stacking, configuring, and handing it over to an application developer or a user. With cloud, you can do that with a few clicks. But before you get there, I think Judith covered this very well on the skill set, on the culture, and how you leg into it. It's a huge task if you think about it, because you are actually making your technology department to think differently, approach differently, even your business users to think and operate differently. That's a cultural change that has to happen within the firm from both technology side and on the business side. But on the skill set side, there's a learning curve. But I think most of the providers have made it much easier over time. If you look 4 years back to now, it's much easier to get into the cloud than before. The same, the switch manufacturers, you can get the same switches available on the cloud as the virtual appliances. So it makes it easy. But still, there is a lagging into aspect of it, because a lot of people are still, for whatever reason, worried about the security. But with all the tools available out there, you can actually create a secure VPC or virtual private cloud with any of the cloud providers pretty easily. And that's where Pico comes into picture. And then we actually have a blueprint where we can actually stand up someone fairly quick and let them leg into it, and also have provide hybrid cloud. That's the legging in feature, right? So you're already with us, and then you can move a smaller workload and then figure out how you are doing, and then you can actually move a bigger workload. And there's another aspect in this, which is all the newer applications that are being built. I think most of them are being built in a microservice architecture. And if you happen to use something like a Kubernetes orchestration or a Kubernetes cluster, that actually makes it less burdensome to move those workloads into the cloud, because they run natively in the cloud as long as you're not tied to some physical calls that you're making to a kernel or an operating system. And going back to your question, Toby, how does the customer demand has changed? Actually, I'll take a different angle here, which is a cloud. A lot of people see it as a cost, and I think everyone on the panel said maybe, but I would say it's a cost versus differentiator. How is cloud helping you to be a differentiator? And that's where I think these workloads are coming in. If you look at risk, for example, right? Can I calculate intraday risk? How much compute do I need? Can I burst up my workload? On-prem, how many servers do I need? Can I even, how expensive is that? That goes to the CapEx point. But from a cloud point of view, if the firm is comfortable in moving the data to the cloud, it makes it much more like, ROI decision. Like, you can say, okay, the cost is not that high, and there is a reward. So those are the workloads that are actually moving to the cloud. But more importantly, it's data and data analytics. So with the big data platforms, there's a design shift, like, moving data to the cloud, to the compute. Now we move compute to the data. So with the data being in the cloud, if your data is in the cloud, there's a lot of workloads which are compute intensive that you can move into the cloud. For example, like, Catalina talked about historical data. I mean, Pico, we offer historical data in the cloud as well. And if you look at the use cases of the data, how are people using historical raw market data? They're using it for back testing. And back testing, you can do it in multiple ways. If you want to do it the right way of looking tick by tick, then you need a lot of compute, but you don't need the continuously. You're only back testing so often. Those are the kind of workloads that are actually are actually driving the demand in the cloud. So in short, it's all data-driven, data analytics, trade, post-trade, pre-trade. Those are the kind of workloads that we see driving the workload into the cloud.
Really interesting, thank you. We are going to move to Q&A in a few minutes. So just a quick note to our audience that if they want to ask questions, and we have a few coming in already, then please do type those into the box, and I will definitely ask either all of our panelists to chime in, or maybe one or two select people, depending on the nature of the question. Before we do that, I just want to throw a question out to our panelists, and it's really around, there's I suppose, we can talk about the cost savings, we can talk about the culture change and the different parts of the business that have to change, and the mindsets and so on. One of the things I think is really interesting for people to understand is the regulation. What does it mean in regulatory terms? So how embracing are regulators of firms that use the cloud, or are they anti it, or are there regulatory hurdles that people have to navigate in order to be compliant when they're in the cloud? Because of course, I suppose it's very easy to say, well, all my data's in this data center over here. It's less easy to say that when it's perhaps in the cloud, and I know you can put it into specific zones, but I just wanted to find out if we could what people thoughts are around the whole sort of regulatory issue. And I thought maybe if I could just turn to Judith first, just to get a quick opinion.
I mean, yeah, so obviously from a financial markets, capital markets perspective, our customers have to deal with a much more complex regulatory regime than perhaps, ones that were, a banking customer that was maybe just only in the UK. So we're very cognizant of that. And we have a specific team here at Microsoft that solely deals with regulatory issues around cloud and advising our customers for that. We actually have a worldwide head of regulatory that works closely with the regulators themselves, as well as in advising customers on the correct way to go about using cloud, as I talked about before, governance and controls, the things that financial services firms specifically have to look at when it comes to the use of cloud. And yes, there are considerations, but it's clear from our conversations with regulators that used in the correct way with the correct controls and governance and security and all those things that you should be thinking about, that there's no barrier from a regulatory perspective to utilising cloud in capital markets.
That's good to hear. I wonder, Gordon, have you got...
I'm going to disagree with Judith a little bit. There are some situations we've had where the regulator has said absolutely no way to cloud, right? To be fair, that's more in the kind of high-end payment space rather than capital markets. People, who have got PCI PIN or the higher-end PCI type compliance regulation where they need to show full audit trails of encryption keys and who's handled them and all that stuff. And the regulator is not keen on cloud there, but it depends where they are. I mean, regulators from all over the world have different views. We were doing one with the Turkish regulator last week, and we find more and more clients actually are getting us engaged with the regulator to go through procedure to get the regulator comfortable with some of the things that they're being asked to do and to ensure that they meet the regulatory obligations they've got for both their local or any international regulator they've got. So, some are stricter than others, some are more inclusive of cloud than others, but there's still quite a few workloads out there in the higher end areas that you need on-premise, or you need co-location, and you need private cloud, or you need to show where the data is physically living, and the regulator might want to see that in an annual review. So it's still not for everyone, but if you work with them, we've not, other than the payment side of things, we've not seen any regulatory hurdles that cannot be overcome by working through with them and the vendor themselves.
Interesting. I hadn't considered the high-end payment side of things in that way. So it's really interesting to hear. Catalina, I wonder if you've got any insights.
Yeah, I think when it comes to regulation as a whole, right, it's hard because you have there's no cookie cutter approach that can be taken, right? And I think Judith spelled it out very nicely earlier, saying that the collaboration, the high degree of collaboration between both regulators, cloud providers, and financial services across the board will deliver on this varying degree of regulatory scrutiny, depending on where you lie in the spectrum in terms of cloud usage and which workloads and which data sets we're talking about. So I think the one thing I'd like to highlight is, and it has come through across the conversation, is the significant level of upskilling that is actually required, right? And it's not just about business teams or technology teams. I think this is a cultural shift and change that is not only occurring for organizations as they embrace cloud, but also from a regulatory standpoint. So I think the next couple of years will deliver some significant change probably, but it will mean that collaboration will definitely help address some of the concerns around outsourcing, data residency, security that often pop up in financial services that are definitely at top of the agenda.
Amit, I wonder if I could just turn to you for a quick second, because obviously, as a working with PwC, you must have had some insights into this as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, sure, Toby. And I would like to echo, what Judith was saying in terms of, definitely clients who are embarking on cloud transformation and adopting cloud in a big way, security and controls is definitely on top of their mind. And we have seen a huge spike in demand of our controls framework and kind of overall control services over the past few years. But to some extent, I would also agree with Gordon that not every regulator in every industry is comfortable for I would say organizations in those specific industries to move it to cloud. From an audit perspective, we certainly have seen some challenges which we have obviously managed to overcome over the past few years. And now most of our audit services, if I'm being honest, are very much on a hybrid kind of model, some systems being on-prem and a lot of systems being on cloud.
Thank you. We could carry on this bit of the conversation, I suspect, until our time completely runs out. But I am going to now switch over to the questions that are coming in from the audience, because we've got a few to get through and not so much time, and I really want to involve them. And our first question is from Bilal Salim. So thank you for Bilal for the question. And he's asking that pertaining to trade execution in the cloud, right? So other than security maybe as a hurdle to overcome, what is latency an issue? What sort of latency could the cloud offer? Is there a deterministic latency play there, or is that not really feasible?
So I don't think latency is the main issue with trade execution, right? I think, and if you look at the big exchanges, right, from a regulatory point of view, you have to prove that every participant has equal access to the exchange, right? So no matter who you are, and that's why, exchange data centers, as I said previously, go through cable equalization, and the big Equinix data centers that do this stuff, LD4s, NY4s, have equalized the cable. So no matter where you are in that data center, you guaranteed same access to the matching engine as someone on the other side of the data center. Things like that, you can't do that. You can't do that in the cloud. I think, there's some challenges there. I think if you look at the crypto space, it's quite interesting because they don't have the legacy debts and technology legacy that some of the other asset classes have had. And I think crypto started very much in the cloud, but what we've seen is some of the mid-size exchanges actually move into a kind of colo/hybrid setup. People like Gemini, who looked at the institutional crypto space, they went into NY4 rather than going into an AWS. So latency is not the only thing that you have to consider when you're looking at execution within a cloud environment. It's about how do participants get access, how do you make sure that access is managed and fair, and there's a bunch of things there. Latency is important. It's always important, but again, you can't put FPGA cards into the cloud. You can't put feed handlers into the cloud with bespoke hardware that a lot of people do in these big exchange facing data centers. So there's still a lot of challenges there from a trade execution point of view. And as I said before, some of them for me just won't be overcome. I don't expect the wholesale trade execution to be going into the hyperscalers in any short term. I think it remains in colo.
James, I'd like to ask you about that actually, because obviously as a data center provider, and you've got a lot of matching engines and co-location going on within the Equinix space, I just think I'm really fascinated to get your view on that question.
Well, I think, Toby, the thing is that firstly, obviously, Gordon has already brought out the big one, which is equalization, which of course you can't do in a cloud environment, or at least not to a sort of provable extent. But really more than that, I'd say that there are so many benefits the cloud brings, flexibility, of course, being one of it. But as far as the actual trading environment is concerned, I think we have to recall that that certainly within the Equinix environment, and yeah, you've already highlighted LD4 and NY4 and so on. These sort of ecosystems have been built up over many, many years, and they've been built with a sort of particular purpose in mind. That purpose being to deliver trading at the highest possible speed with the lowest possible latency, subject to any kind of regulatory control, equalization, and that the participants in that industry, by and large, are already there. So, in a sense, achieving that particular area doesn't really give them any benefit by doing it in the cloud, even if it wasn't for things like equalization. So I think that's sort of the first area. The second thing that I think we have to remember is that is possibly the security aspects of this. Now, I think we all know that stories of security issues with the cloud are probably really very much over exaggerated. I think it was Amit that referred earlier on to the point that there are very successful ways you can do that sort of security now. But nevertheless, if you look at the entirety of the whole setup of the trading environment, I think that today and for the foreseeable future, it is one that actually simply functions better. It is faster to deliver. Its performance is more rapid and more secure in the sort of cross-connection way, or the sort of the changing Equinix fabric way, which is our sort of a newer method of connecting people together in those ways. And as a result, it is very much fit for purpose, will be so for a considerable time to come, and is delivering what people actually need.
No, interesting stuff. I'm going to move the questions on now. Thank you for that. We have one from Dan Fearney. I hope I got your name right there, Dan. Dan's asking about the geopolitical situation, and of course, there's all the stuff about Huawei and 5G, and his question is really around Alibaba as a cloud provider. Does he see risk there? Is that something that could be applicable in Europe, or is that just and North America, or is that going to continue, I suppose, that whole geopolitical risk assessment and ability to compete? Anybody like to take that?
I'll go for it, Toby.
Thanks,
I mean, only if I kind of had a crystal ball in terms of predicting what Alibaba could. Yeah, I mean, obviously with kind of dominant players already having a good share, and the challengers kind of trying to, I would say, make space. Alibaba has been known to kind of put a really competing force and a compelling proposition. Now, what needs to be seen is what other technologies and how they can assure in the light of the pandemic and all the negative press which has been attributed to China, right? Obviously, Alibaba kind of being headquartered there, all those negative elements are associated with that side of the world. And what offerings do they come up with, and are they able to dislodge? That needs to be seen. But there is quite a stiff competition, I can assure you that.
Yeah, so I suppose the question was asked of Alibaba, but it's really a wider question, isn't it, about geopolitical offerings and whether the political risk comes into the equation and what that means generally, I think.
Yes, and that's where a lot of these regulations and as I mean, I'll talk of the European Union per se, with regards to the data not being moved out of European Union, so on and so forth. So there will be apprehensions in terms of where the data centers are hosted. Are they able to kind of provide, I would say, assurance that there are no security concerns in terms of what service they're offering, if that is kind of answering that particular question.
I think so, and it's actually a very good segue into the next question, which comes from Trevor Hunt, and Trevor's asking about GDPR, which you alluded to just there, Amit. But and he's wondering whether GDPR is actually creates any benefits for vendors in the cloud space, or if it's really just something that protects consumers. Does it have are there any plus points, I suppose, from a cloud or cloud vendor perspective? I wonder if I can throw that open.
Again, if anybody wants to kind of take that, my take on it is, yes, primarily it is kind of meant for the customers, and they obviously get a lot of benefit with such regulations. But one advantage, I think, for the vendors, so to speak, is that they have to manage and maintain less data. So with all those regulations, right, you are kind of compelled to dispose of that data after a certain period of time. So that way, at least, I would think that's one advantage for the vendors themselves.
And I was wondering if there's an advantage that ties a little bit back to Judith's point earlier around governance, and because it kind of forces you to think very clearly about the security and the privacy of the data that's being in the cloud. And so I just wondered if maybe it reduces the risk. You know, we've seen in the past huge data leaks, you know, back in time, and clearly if you have to think of privacy. I can't remember the exact term in GDPR now, but you have to. It's privacy by design, I think it's called. And please, somebody correct me if that's not the right term, but where you have to design it in from the very beginning, and so maybe that does have a benefit towards both cloud providers and vendors of services within the cloud, because it helps them to think more clearly around that.
It certainly does. In fact, you know, it kind of compels you to think of security and kind of keep it front and center. And, you know, you design your controls and governance, as you mentioned, Toby, very much with that advantage in mind.
Thank you. We have a question from Paul Liggett, and Paul's asking about automation in the cloud, and particularly around the emerging sort of cloud FinOps type roles and automation thereof, and whether that sort of role is driving cultural change to make business more accountable for their spend. Anybody?
I guess I can take it. So automation, that's a great question. Automation is something of a cultural shift, whether you are on-prem, private cloud, or public cloud. But like, you know, I mean, I think the choice is what do you use for automation and how you want to do automation, especially with that whole Terraform that's available now. You can do the same. You can use the same automation tools for both on-prem and off-prem. So I would say cloud is not driving the automation, but I think automation is a cultural change, as a DNA change, as I call it, for a given firm.
And does cloud make it easier to automate that cultural change? I suppose this would be a kind of related question.
So if you see it as a greenfield, if you're like, you know, if you're getting into a new space because you have to rewrite some of the stuff or you're developing new systems. So since you're starting in a greenfield, yes, it will give you an opportunity to automate. But I think the same thing applies whether if you're moving from a platform to like, you know, a different platform, or if you're rewriting a stack. But again, it's like, you know, it's an opportunity that cloud will present you to actually take up automation early on, since you will be it's a new deployment.
Thank you. Niyati Jain is asking whether panelists foresee crypto trading, another recent phenomena, moving to the cloud now that many banks and financial institutions have started running their own crypto trading desks. And I think, you know, Gordon, you made the point, I think, earlier about crypto not having the baggage that some other applications have had in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we do quite a lot in the crypto space, although, you know, it's still relatively small in overall size. But yeah, I mean, crypto is very much born in the cloud, right? But I think there's been a gradual maturing in some of the exchanges where they've embraced a hybrid model, or they've come down off it. I mean, you know, we've taken two particular clients, kind of top 10 type exchanges by volume, out of the generic cloud and put them into, you know, a private cloud Equinix-based environment. So, you know, I think there is execution going on in crypto in the public cloud, although I think it was Coinbase got hit by the very large day-long AWS outage from a week ago. I think that'll be hastening some of the other exchanges looking at the diversity in their footprints, because some of the uptime and some of the hyperscalers is not exactly perfect. So crypto, I think, will continue to execute in the cloud, but I think there's definitely a hybrid model in that particular asset class, and I'm sure that'll continue.
If I may, I mean, I echo Gordon's comment. On the crypto, we are seeing more and more hybrid because of the outages or like, you know, the single vendor lock-ins. So we are seeing hybrid, like, you know, especially with some of the crypto running in Kubernetes, which makes it easy to run in a hybrid environment.
Thank you very much. We have a question from Jim Hughes, and it really ties back to the early part of the discussion when people were talking about cost. And Jim's asking, and I think, Catalina, it might be a good question for you, given your experience with moving huge loads into the cloud. But what happens, you know, how do people avoid some of the higher costs, which, you know, can be quite significant if you're not careful in maintaining your cost profiles? How do they avoid those hidden charges, I guess?
Yeah, and I think we've come a long way over the last couple of years, and it also depends on the cloud provider and the type of agreement that you strike with the cloud provider as well. But I think, talking from the experience, at least with moving our to history data set and making that available in BigQuery to get it ready for query and providing access to our end users directly. I think there's the two key components when it comes to cost is talking about storage and talking about compute, right? And on the storage side, I think it's very clear and straightforward who owns the responsibility, and you can avoid those unnecessary storage costs if you're smart about what you're moving into the cloud and what you're keeping, knowing that maybe that tick history data set will remain there, it will be immutable, and therefore you will always be able to refer back to it. But then on the compute side, I think there's clear ways of ensuring that you've set the controls in place, and goes back to our point around governance and setting up these processes, right? To ensure that, for example, when you set up a new project, you are building in those cost controls, and you're saying, I will not allow this particular project to go above this certain threshold. And you can also manage that throughout time, understanding where maybe you might need a big burst in compute, and you can have those resources allocated to it, and when you won't need that. So I think there's enough tools for people to be able to manage and to know upfront what these costs will be. The transparency is there. It's knowing really what to do and what not to do when it comes to those two components.
I saw a lot of nodding there from Judith.
Yes, I think you know, we have. I've had personal experience of going into a customer who may be using, you know, our cloud or another public cloud provider, and you know, the costs have got significantly out of control, and that's really going back to this whole process and governance and controls piece at the start. You know, if you set that up correctly, and you have that in place, you know, you can even get to a place in exactly the same way that you would with your on-prem world, where you are attributing costs against business divisions, etc. There's absolutely no reason why you can't have it set up in exactly the same way, so that you don't let things get out of control and you do have a good measure on it. And I think just looking forward and understanding how you're going to use cloud in the future, and speaking to your public cloud provider about that, and sharing that vision and sharing that information might actually help them advise and guide on, you know, what the best way to get that set up, what the most cost-effective way to get that set up. So I probably really advocate that if you're using public cloud, And some people do use public cloud without interacting with the public cloud provider, whether that be us or AWS or GCP, etc. Actually bringing them into that process and sharing with them, I think is probably a great plan of action, just to get their advice and guidance on how to set it up in the most cost efficient way.
Right, excellent, thank you. And I think I'd be quite interested in getting, James, your kind of view on this, because I mean, you obviously you've got all the traditional, bare metal facilities within Equinix's data centers, but you've also got all the smart new stuff that you guys are doing. So really interested to get your view.
So I think, firstly, I'd have to say that bare metal is definitely the new stuff rather than the old stuff. So absolutely right. So we do everything from traditional colo, which of course has been around from wherever, access to whatever kind of hyperscaler, for example, Judas offerings or Beeks or Pico, to now bare metal. Bare metal, of course, being the offering by which people can take dedicated hardware on a sort of pay-as-you-go basis. It's sort of something that is really going to come to the fore now. We're very excited about it. I think it's going to see a lot of usage in the coming years. But I think really as a sort of backup to, frankly, what everyone else has been saying, to us, this is more a question of choice. It's a question of right sizing your environment, but also of using it for the right things. I mean, for example, we've already discussed that that crypto people were born in the cloud. Absolutely. And of course, that's where fintech operators are as well. So elements of whatever anybody does going forward will always have to have some kind of cloud base to them. But then it becomes an issue of where are you going to get the maximum productivity from what you're buying, and treating it accordingly. All these things now, Equinix, as you know, has been planning this sort of edge core and exchange type mechanism for a long time to right size these sort of things, to put things where they're needed in the right method of delivery. And I think that's the key. It's for the customer to engage with the services of many of our knowledgeable participants today, with us and others, to make sure they have things in the right kind of footprint that they need, be it dedicated, be it some kind of dedicated on demand, be it in a private or public cloud. It's really to right size these things and get the correct solution, which now is relatively easy to do, relatively.
Thank you very much, James. And thank you to Equinix for hosting this webinar today. We have come to the end of our time, and I'm very sorry we have a load of questions coming in, which I think is testament to the great panelists that we have. And I want to thank everybody for their time today, and apologize to those members of the audience whose questions we didn't have time to get to. I wonder if, in closing, I could just go around the panel and ask for a quick statement on how you see the future of cloud developing. And I'll start with Amit, if I may.
Yeah, sure. I absolutely see, cloud being adopted much further than what we are seeing now. That's the only direction I can see everyone traveling. I know there are some concerns which earlier were raised in terms of security, latency, compute power, and all that. But with newer technologies coming, words like quantum computing, 5G technology, all those things would definitely get to help adoption of cloud. So I would say it's very exciting times going forward.
Thank you, Judith.
Yes, just to echo Amit's comments, and actually to refer back to some previous ones. Our experience of transformation in the financial services in the last few months from COVID is just exponential. And when we look at cloud and the things that we talk about using in cloud today, I think even 2 years ago, people would have written that off and said it wasn't possible. From our engineering perspective, we are absolutely looking at, everything being able to be done in the cloud, and I think that's only going to move us forward very quickly over the foreseeable future to things that maybe aren't possible today, being possible in the very near future as well in cloud.
Thank you. Gordon?
I'm going to agree with Judith this time. So I think a lot of the easier stuff has been done, right? I think stuff that could move easily has moved easily. There's some technology advances needed to get a lot of the more difficult workloads into the cloud, and I think we'll see that move and we'll see that happen. But it's going to gain pace. It's more hybrid. It's no one is doing everything with one vendor, it seems, and being able to connect and talk between clouds is becoming more and more important and resilient and always up fashion. So it's certainly not slowing down, and I think good for both vendors and purchasers.
Fantastic. Sitharam?
So I think there will be an increased usage of hybrid cloud, and I think in the coming days, I think we'll see a financial market ecosystem building with a combination of, like, in a hybrid cloud with a on-prem for your trade execution and some of the stuff being in the cloud. Once that ecosystem builds, I think you'll see a lot more financial users moving their workloads into the cloud in the form of pre-trade or post-trade. Trade, I think, for the foreseeable future will be in co-location.
Fantastic. Catalina, just quickly.
I think we will, I fully agree with the comments made by the previous panelists. I think what we will continue to see, especially in this context, is a focus on operational resilience and driving efficiency. So I think continued adoption of cloud as a way to increase that optionality and drive that efficiency across the operation will be key. And then at the same time, trying to reduce those data silos that exist in some, especially when in organizations burdened with legacy, and try to reduce that fragmentation and bring those data silos together to reduce that cost of ownership. So if anything, it will continue to accelerate.
Thank you. And finally, but not least of all, James.
Yeah, I think really I agree with everything that's been said so far by my colleagues. And for me, it's all about three things. It's all about the digital edge that is now coming to financial services. It's all about having the core of your services being close to wherever you are, being able to access your partners and so on. And it's all about exchange. It's all about data exchange, being able to mix data in and amongst providers of whatever sort they're doing, wherever they sit in the value chain.
Fantastic. There are a few questions that we didn't get to. I will, of course, answer those and having socialized them with our panelists with their permission, and then come back to people who've asked those questions. So apologies that we didn't get to it now, but those people will get an answer. And it just remains for me to say once again, thank you very much to all of our panelists. It was really great to have you on. I thought it was an excellent discussion, and thank you.